What is the most disturbing place you have ever visited? I never believed in curses until I visited that house. It was an old, decaying Victorian mansion on the outskirts of a small town in Louisiana. Locals avoided it, muttering about disappearances and strange noises, but curiosity got the better of me. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of rotting wood and something metallic, blood maybe. As I explored, I felt watched. Not the kind of paranoia you shake off, but something deeper, primal. Then I saw them, handprints on the walls, impossibly high up, as if something had been crawling along the ceiling. A child's laughter echoed through the halls, but the house was abandoned. I tried to leave, but every door led me back to the same room. A nursery frozen in time, the crib untouched, a mobile still swaying above it. Then the whispers began. They spoke my name. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment in the dim light I saw something in the mirror. Not my reflection, something grinning with hollow eyes and an open mouth that stretched too wide. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was screaming, the next I was in my car, the house looming behind me. But something changed that night. My reflection doesn't always match my movements anymore. And sometimes when I close my eyes I still hear the laughter. There was something wrong with that forest. I felt it the moment I stepped inside. I was hiking alone in Romania when I stumbled upon Hoia Baciu, a forest infamous for disappearances. The trees twisted unnaturally, their branches curling like fingers reaching for something unseen. The deeper I walked, the quieter it became. No wind, no birds, just my own footsteps crunching against the brittle leaves. Then I saw them. Shadows darting between the trees, too fast, too silent. I told myself it was just my imagination, but then the air turned electric, buzzing against my skin like static. My phone screen flickered before dying completely. And then I heard the voice. A whisper impossibly close to my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. No one. But the footprints in the dirt, my own footprints, were disappearing. One by one, as if something unseen was erasing my presence from the forest. Panic gripped me. I ran. The trees blurred, the ground twisted beneath my feet. Just when I thought I was lost forever, I broke through the tree-line and collapsed on the grass, gasping for air. I don't know what followed me out, but sometimes at night I still hear that whisper. And when I check my footprints in the morning, some of them are missing. The hotel didn't exist on any map, and maybe it never should have. I was driving through Nevada when a storm forced me off the highway. With no signal and no towns nearby, I was relieved to see a neon sign flickering in the rain. Moonlight in vacancy. The lobby smelled of dust and old perfume. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a frozen smile, handed me a key before I could even ask for a room. The hallway was unsettling, too long with too many doors. My room was at the very end. As I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. There was a mirror on the opposite wall, and in its reflection my room was slightly different. The bed was unmade. The closet door was open. And worst of all, there was someone standing in the corner. I spun around. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer. Facing me. Grinning. I didn't sleep. At dawn I rushed to check out, but the lobby was empty. The receptionist was gone. Even the neon sign had vanished. When I got back to the highway, I looked for the hotel on my GPS. Nothing. No record of it ever existing. And yet, when I got home, I found the room key in my jacket pocket. The subway car should have been empty. But I wasn't alone. It was past midnight in Tokyo, and I had just missed the last train. A nearly abandoned station, flickering fluorescent lights, and a single train car waiting with its doors open. I stepped inside. The air was stale, the seats cracked and faded. I was the only passenger. Or so I thought. As the doors slid shut, I saw him, A man sitting at the far end, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit. His head was tilted downward, his face obscured by shadows. I hadn't noticed him before. Had he been there all along? The train started moving, but the windows showed nothing, just endless black, as if the tunnel had swallowed the outside world. The lights flickered. And then, the man moved. Slowly, unnaturally. His head snapped up, but his face was blurred, distorted like a corrupted image. The train kept going, past stations that didn't exist. My reflection in the window wasn't my own anymore, it was his. When the train finally stopped, I bolted. The moment I stepped onto the platform, the car vanished into the darkness. I checked the station map. The line I had taken didn't exist. But sometimes late at night, I hear the distant rumble of a train that shouldn't be there. And I know he's still waiting. I swear the grave was empty when I first saw it. I was visiting an old cemetery in New Orleans, drawn by stories of hauntings and unmarked tombs. The air was thick, the scent of damp earth and decay lingering with every step. Then I saw it, a freshly dug grave, no name, no flowers, just an open hole in the ground. Something about it felt wrong, like it was waiting. I leaned closer, peering into the darkness below. Empty. Just dirt and shadows. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A rustling sound. Faint at first, then frantic. Scratching. From inside the grave. I froze. The dirt shifted. A breathless, wheezing sound rose from the hole, and then, a hand. Pale, skeletal, clawing its way upward. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the gates, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. When I looked back, the grave was gone. No disturbed earth. No open hole. Just an untouched patch of grass. But that night, I woke up gasping for air, my fingers caked with dirt. And under my nails, something that looked like dried blood. The lighthouse hasn't been operational for decades. So why was the light on? I was hiking along a rocky coastline in Maine when I spotted it, a crumbling lighthouse standing alone on a jagged cliff. Locals warned me to stay away, muttering about the keeper who never left, but curiosity got the better of me. As I approached, the wind howled, carrying the scent of salt and something foul, something rotting. The door was ajar, swaying slightly as if beckoning me inside. The interior was a ruin of dust and decay, but the spiral staircase remained intact, winding up into the darkness. I climbed. Each step groaned under my weight. Halfway up, I noticed something odd. Footsteps in the dust. Bare footprints. Fresh. Leading upward. Then I heard it. A rhythmic tapping, like nails drumming against glass. It was coming from the lantern room. When I reached the top, the massive glass lens was intact but cracked. And in the reflection of those fractures, I saw him. A gaunt figure in a tattered uniform, grinning with too many teeth, his empty eyes locked onto mine. The light flickered, and suddenly I was at the bottom of the stairs again, gasping for breath, my heart pounding. The door slammed shut behind me. From the cliffs, I watched as the beacon flickered one last time before going dark. The lighthouse hasn't been lit in over 70 years. And yet, some nights when the fog rolls in, I see that light. And I know he's still there, waiting for another visitor. The mannequins were facing the other way when I walked in. It was a small thrift store in a quiet part of town, the kind of place that smelled like dust and forgotten memories. I wandered in, drawn to the dim lighting and cluttered aisles, until I reached the back room, where they were. A dozen mannequins, all dressed in faded clothing, stood in a tight cluster. Their faces were blank, their hands positioned awkwardly as if frozen mid-motion. I swear they were turned away when I entered. But now, they were facing me. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. Something about them felt off. Their limbs were too long, their fingers too sharp. The air was unnaturally still, thick with the scent of old fabric and something metallic. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible creak. like joints bending. One of them had moved. Just slightly. I ran. As I reached the door, I chanced one last glance back. The mannequins were closer. Their heads tilted as if watching me leave. I never went back to that store. But weeks later, I passed by and peeked through the window. The shop had been abandoned for years. And yet, standing near the glass, dressed exactly as before, was one of the mannequins, facing the door, waiting. The painting's eyes weren't following me. They were watching me. I was in a small antique shop in Prague, a dimly lit place filled with relics that smelled of time itself. Tucked away in a dusty corner, I found it, a portrait of a woman in Victorian clothing, her pale face framed by dark curls, her eyes unnervingly lifelike. The shopkeeper wouldn't tell me where it came from, just muttered something about things best left alone. I should have listened. That night, I hung it in my living room. Almost immediately, the atmosphere in my apartment changed. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen presence. The painting seemed different too. Subtle things, the corners of her lips, the tilt of her head. And her eyes. They weren't just following me. They were tracking me. One night, I woke up gasping, my room unnaturally cold. The painting was no longer on the wall. It was on the floor, leaning against my bed, closer than before. That was enough. I took it outside, dumped it in the alley, and locked my door. But when I woke up the next morning, it was back, hanging perfectly in place. I burned it that night. Watched the flames consume the canvas, blackening those eyes forever. But sometimes in the quiet of my apartment, I still feel it. That gaze. The town wasn't on any map. And now I know why. I was on a road trip through the Midwest when a storm forced me to take an unfamiliar exit. The road led to a small town, quaint, silent, almost too perfect. White picket fences, identical houses, neatly trimmed lawns. But there were no people. Not a single soul. I walked through the empty streets, past cars that looked like they hadn't moved in years. Storefronts displayed goods that were decades old, yet untouched by dust. A newspaper on a bench caught my eye, dated 1956. Then I heard it. The sound of a door creaking open behind me. I turned. Nothing. But when I looked back down the street, I froze. The houses had changed. Some were now in ruins, others completely gone, as if time had suddenly caught up with them. And then, the whispers started. Low, urgent, surrounding me from nowhere and everywhere at once. You shouldn't be here. I ran back to my car, my heart pounding. The moment I sped out of town, the storm cleared, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, the town was gone. Just an empty stretch of road like it had never been there. I tried to find it again. Searched every map, every record. Nothing. No sign of it. But sometimes when I drive late at night, I see that same exit sign again. And I keep driving. I only stayed one night, but I still dream about that room. It was a last-minute trip, and the only motel with vacancies was a run-down place off the highway. The clerk barely looked at me as he handed me the key. Room 109. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like the room hadn't been opened in years. The wallpaper was peeling, the mirror was cracked, and the bed had an unsettling dent, like someone had been lying there moments before. I told myself I was imagining things. But then around 3 a.m. I woke up. The air was freezing, my breath visible in the dark. The bathroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it. And in the mirror above the sink, I saw something move. A figure. Standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But when I turned back to the mirror, the figure was still there. Closer. Smiling. I didn't pack. I didn't check out. I just ran. The next morning, from the safety of a different hotel, I called the motel to ask about room 109. The clerk was silent for a long time before saying, "That room's been empty for years. No one stays there." Then he hung up. There was something wrong with the silence in that house. It was an old farmhouse, tucked away on a quiet stretch of land in the countryside. The moment I stepped inside, a sense of stillness enveloped me, like time itself had paused. The floors creaked under my weight and the air smelled stale, damp wood and something else, something old. I stayed the night, thinking the eerie feeling would fade. It didn't. The house was too quiet. There were no sounds of wind, no rustling leaves, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Just an oppressive, suffocating silence. Around midnight I heard it, soft footsteps coming from upstairs. But when I checked, the floor was empty. The air grew colder and I saw my breath mist in front of me. The footsteps started again, closer this time. I raced to the attic. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the walls were lined with old mirrors, cracked, dirty, reflecting nothing. But in one of them I saw her. A woman standing in the corner, staring at me with hollow eyes. I ran out, leaving the house behind. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see her, waiting in the dark, just beyond the edge of my vision. The clock was ticking, but time didn't seem to be moving. I found the old church on the edge of town, abandoned and forgotten by everyone but the few locals who whispered about its strange past. The doors were cracked open as though inviting me in, so I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the pews rotting, the stained glass windows casting eerie, fragmented shadows across the floor. But what struck me the most was the clock on the far wall. It wasn't just ticking. It was louder than it should have been, filling the space with a rhythmic, unsettling echo. I approached it, drawn by the strange noise, and noticed something odd. The hands were frozen at 3:15, yet the second hand kept moving, tick-tock, tick-tock, as if counting down to something. As I stood there, the room began to feel smaller, the walls closing in. The temperature dropped, and I could hear whispers, too faint to understand, but growing louder with each passing second. The clock seemed to know I was there. And then at 3:15 the second hand stopped. The room went silent. Everything froze, except for the shadows. They moved. I ran, the whispers following me, but when I reached the door, it slammed shut behind me. I turned to see the church as it had been before, decayed and abandoned. But the clock, I could still hear it ticking in the distance. And I know that when it stops again, it will be my turn. Feeling creeped out? Hit subscribe and enter the unknown. Ring the bell or the shadows might follow you home. Share with those who dare, they'll need it when the darkness comes.